But through the traditional way that affordable housing is built, through inclusionary zoning, where a private developer will build 20 units for every 100 that are approved, that equates to 485,000 units across the state of New Jersey. That's a lot of units. And when you take into account how many COs were issued in the last 10 years, 140,000, it seems like an impossible task. And we haven't even done a market analysis to determine if the state can even absorb that number of units. How we could codify a formula without doing a market analysis to determine whether it is how many units the state could actually absorb, I think is putting the cart before the horse. And if we continue along this line, we could end up having to pave over open space, farmland, at the detriment of the environment. Now, some may say, well, why can't the towns build projects that are 100% affordable? Well, because developers don't do that. Now, a town could undertake that responsibility, but that costs money. And if a town zones for that 100% affordable units, and a developer does not come forward to build the project, the town has to put up its bonding capacity so that the project can be built. Then what does that do for infrastructure projects and other things that the town would need to have that financing available for? When you talk about the immunities, under the old legislation, the town was granted immunity from a builder's remedy if it was determined, only if it was determined they would lose the immunity, only if it was determined if the town was constitutionally non-compliant. That's a pretty strong presumption. Now, any party can challenge this methodology under a realistic opportunity review. So at any point in time during this process, and specifically at the 5-year mark, anybody can come in and challenge this, saying that while the town may have met all the marks, we don't think there's a realistic opportunity that these units will be built. The town is going to have to defend itself when it comes to that. And what happens to those towns that are what they call land poor, right? Towns that don't have a lot of open space. Well, there's a method in here for that to be adjusted, but in order for the requirement to be adjusted, the town has to zone for redevelopment of areas that are already built, 25%. So what does that mean? That means that now existing development may end up being torn down, and higher density housing would replace it. The Mount Laurel Doctrine was clear that affordable housing was necessary and no municipality could prevent it from being built. But it did say one thing in the initial Mount Laurel decisions, that that it should not impact the character of our neighborhoods. This legislation will certainly impact the character of our neighborhoods, because the only way that these number of units can be built will be done by increasing density and without any land use planning. I think that this legislation in its current form will promote haphazard development. Why do I say that? because nowhere in this legislation is there a provision for the courts to look at sound land use planning. There's nothing that takes into account whether or not where these developments are going to occur, whether or not there's jobs. There's nothing in this legislation to look at whether or not mass transit is available in order to avoid everyone in a low to moderate income unit having to have a car. There's nothing in this legislation that takes into account existing infrastructure or the environment. You know, we argue a lot about environment here and how far we should go. But there's nothing in this legislation that talks about keeping our environment clean. Or where does the environment play into a determination on the number of affordable units? The environment is swept aside under this legislation. Anyone that thinks that this legislation will simplify the process and save taxpayers' dollars, I think is sadly mistaken. This will make the prior round look like Disney World. My only hope is that, keeping with the spirit of the legislation, that we can work together to correct some of these problems that we've identified. Because if we don't, you will begin to see massive overdevelopment and sprawl across the state of New Jersey, and that's a shame. As a result of that, Madam President, I will be voting no. Thank you.